Good morning, this is Bruce McKellar in sunny Southwest Michigan, and I'd like to welcome you all this morning to our virtual breakfast program. We've had plenty of liquid sunshine down here today, and I think we're built to stay that way a little bit, but we'd like to get started this morning with Martin Chilvers. Martin Chilvers is our field crops pathologist, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about corn tar spot today, a problem that we've had in Southwest Michigan over the last couple of years. It appears to be getting worse. So Marty, I'll turn it over to you.
And good morning, everybody. So let's go through and talk a little bit about tar spot then. So tar spot was found in Michigan in 2015 for the first time, or 2016 rather, for the first time. In the US, it was 2015 that it was found for the first time. So this is a new disease, right? So that's an important thing to remember. We don't know a great deal about it. It's been found in Mexico and Central America since the early 1900s and does a lot of damage down there, but it's a very, very new disease for this area. And we're really scrambling to understand how it's going to behave here. And already it's done quite a lot of damage. With respect to what we're looking at for tar spot then, in terms of identification, we're looking at raised black fungal structures on the corn leaf. They're fairly small, around about 1/4 inch or so in size, and sometimes a little bit of dead material around that black raised fungal structure. And it's caused by a fungus, Phyllochora matus. The name's not particularly important, but just to know that it's caused by fungus, so fungicides are a potential management tool. The first year, it didn't really do much, and we just sort of saw it, fairly late in the season. 2017 when we saw it. Again, it's all initially found in Allegan County. That's where the first findings of it were. About 2017, we had a field where we estimated about a 40 bushel yield loss in that particular field. And then 2018 really was the epidemic year for the disease. And we've seen it all the way up and down the western side of Michigan. And really around the southern portion of Lake Michigan. So northern Illinois, northern Indiana, south eastern Wisconsin, and just touching eastern Iowa. So it's sort of spread around that region and Ohio as well. So now we've got it in the 6-state region that it's been confirmed in. And we've had pretty significant losses. I've had a number of people call me and report losses in at least 5 or 6 different counties across Michigan. So it's really become a really significant issue. And we're quite concerned that it will continue to be an issue until we can do a better job with host resistance. Resistance from the plant is really essential for managing most diseases. For those that can see the image there, we're across about 27 counties now in Michigan. As I said, really on the west and south is where losses have been pretty significant. But we've had 50 bushel losses reported up in just south of Greenville, into Montcalm. So it's out and about. Based on 2018 disease spread, I fully expect that this thing may very well hit the thumb this coming season. A pretty little doubt about that, I guess, but we'll have to wait and see how disease progresses. And this one was just really to show you that regional spread again. So I mentioned there were 6 states involved, right, really around the southern end of Lake Michigan. So it's not just Michigan. And the climate sort of prediction models are sort of this whole sort of northern corn belt. So again, we don't know a great deal about it, but the folk at CIMMYT in Mexico looked at climate similarities between areas in Central America, South America, where the disease is a problem, and then compared that to the US, and it's really across this northern corn belt. So it matches up pretty well with where we've seen it to date. And so again, that's a real concern, right? There's plenty of evidence showing that it's likely to habitate quite well here based on the weather conditions that we have. Okay, and so one question I do get is how early does this thing infect? Okay, well here's a photo of some V3 corn. This is volunteer corn though. So just demonstrating though that very young plants can be infected. Okay, so this is volunteer corn in a heavily tar spot diseased field. Okay, so if inoculum is there, if disease conditions are favorable, we will get disease. please be on the lookout for it. We definitely want to know as soon as we start seeing infection in Michigan here. Last year, as early as it was seen was July, so it could very well be popping up. And obviously this wet weather is going to be very favourable to infection too. Okay, so I just want to talk about disease progression. So the disease is somewhat tricky. It's a little bit different to northern leaf blight and grey leaf spot. There are a couple of the really major ones that we deal with in corn, and are far more familiar with dealing with in terms of making fungicide sprays and whatnot. And I say it's tricky because what appears to be happening is that the plant is becoming infected, but isn't really going to show signs of infection until a little bit later date, right? And so what I'm showing you here then is the field out in Allegan that we set up a fungicide trial on. We went in August 10th and there was disease on every plant, but the amount of disease was very, very low. Like one or two of these black spots on a leaf, or sometimes no spots on a leaf, but somewhere on the plant there was a spot or two, right? But from there it accelerated through to like what I was estimating to be about 10% infection, and I've got a photo up there to show what I was estimating to be around about 10% infection, through to plant death, right? So we're going from a few spots on a plant, August 10th, through to plant death by 7th of September. Okay, so we've got a month window there where we sort of see it starting to accelerate, and then plants are dead. So it's growing throughout the plant and then shutting that plant down pretty dramatically. So that's why scouting is going to be super important this year, being aware of that. And again, please sending observations to me and we'll try and make that, circulate that amongst the community so we can sort of keep on top of this. And just another photo of disease progression. So this is aerial. And so what I'm showing you here is, you can see the disease from the air there in late August where the disease has moved up in the canopy, and by September 7th we've got corn that's lodging from those heavily infested areas. And I just wanted to show briefly, fungicides do appear to be assisting. So this particular fungicide trial was sprayed at R3 growth stage. We would have sprayed it a little bit earlier if we'd been able to, but anyway, R3 application did assist in maintaining some green leaf area, and you can see here, we've got control plots mixed amongst those different fungicide mode of actions there. And really what we're sort of seeing is that mixed mode of actions are the way to go here for disease management. Both myself and a colleague in Wisconsin have seen that those mixed mode of actions tend to provide the best disease control. The real question about fungicide applications will be timing, of course. And I've already received quite a few calls, concerns about anthracnose on corn. Right, we see anthracnose early every year, and typically we don't really think of that as a yield robbing disease because it doesn't tend to continue past those early vegetative stages typically, unless we're talking about anthracnose stalk rot. And unfortunately, anthracnose leaf disease, leaf blight, and stalk rot often don't correlate in a field. Right, we might see a lot of leaf disease but no stalk rot, and vice versa. So that makes that particular disease difficult to manage. But the point was I was receiving calls about that, and I really think for the most part it's too early to be spraying. As much as possible, I think we want to be holding off on those fungicide applications until the tasseling or stilking timing. That's typically when we see our best control responses. However, we do want to be out there scouting for this particular disease and looking for it. So what I'm showing here is just an untreated on the left-hand side compared to what was sprayed with a premix fungicide, and just showing you differences in standability of that particular plot. It was pretty evident how the fungicide had assisted with standability. And just a couple of final points here. So we looked as well at the impact of tar spot on silage. Of course, if this disease is in there, creating lodging problems, that's obviously an issue in itself. We did also look at some quality parameters on the silage, and unfortunately it's affecting those too. As you might expect, when the corn is dried down and starting to fall over and lodge, all that stalk integrity is gone. The moisture in that corn is way down to about 20% moisture. So we're far below where we need to be for correct silage production. So that's one thing to be aware of in those dry areas affected by this disease when it dries out parts of the field. But just in general too, it is affecting quality, so it's lowering energy, increasing indigestible components of that silage. So bad news for silage as well. So another reason to really keep an eye out for this particular disease. Okay, so a couple of points here, just in summary then, thinking about managing task blight. So hybrid resistance is going to be really important. That decision has been made for the most part already, right? Scouting, going to be critical. Absolutely. Let's keep on top of scouting, get a good sense of where it is, and then timely fungicide applications. And so as much as possible, we'd like people to wait until the VT fungicide timing sort of window. Again, and that's where we see the best yield response for most diseases. And again, scout, be aware of what's going on. Something else that came up last year is be prepared to harvest early. Would you prefer to, pay a little bit for drying as opposed to trying to pick it up off the ground? So this is where, again, knowing where the disease is at and how severe it is really important. If you've got some areas of the field that are really severely impacted, you might want to get in and pick that up early prior to it lodging. Planting the corn will certainly increase risk, but it seems to be a very, very minor component. So rotation does not eliminate this disease. So the last few photos that I'm showing you, and this one here actually, is corn into soybean. So rotation is really not going to help. This fungus produces a lot of spores. They get airborne, and it's based on the epidemic pattern we've seen. It moves quite some distance very quickly. So it's a regional problem. It's not through tillage or rotation that we can control this disease. We've had a number of producers tell us that they even moldboard plowed some fields, planted corn, and still got smashed with this task blight disease. And finally, be really cautious with irrigation. I've had a number of producers now, Southwest Michigan and other areas that irrigated, and that really drove disease. And in some instances, I know Bruce is working with somebody that irrigated just twice because they didn't need to irrigate a great deal. But just from those 2 irrigation applications, that's where they were seeing 40, 50 bushel losses, just because the disease really responds to free moisture. So we need you this year. We would like to know when and where we first see the disease. And I'll write a follow-up article to this, but what we'd like to do is pick 1 or 2 fields as well. Once you see disease in that, we'd like you to revisit that field every couple of weeks to sort of track disease progress. And I'll send around a rating scale to help with that. And of course, my contact details are up there, my email address and Twitter handle.
So how does, you mentioned irrigation, how does the natural irrigation that we're having this year will impact the disease? We're certainly having a very wet year.
Right.
How do you see the risk of the conditions we have this season with this disease?
With this particular disease, it is very early, right? These, early moisture events certainly may get things started, I guess, right? But it's really going to be, more dependent on rainfall through July and August when we've actually got a canopy in place. But it may, potentially get things going a little bit earlier. Having said that, we were delayed in planting, so we haven't had as much of a canopy as we typically would. But the other side of that too is, where we are delayed in planting, we're going to potentially be delayed in maturity, and that may very well make things worse, right? So you've got more time for that disease to really do damage while we're trying to get that crop dried down. And I know we had a question with respect to other diseases too. Currently, the main concern with other diseases coming in, head scab in wheat is certainly one that we'd be quite concerned about with all this moisture. I just pulled up the head scab model. Surprisingly, the risk wasn't particularly high. That model's based on relative humidity. But I'd be quite concerned this year, and I expect we're going to see some heavy pressure. I know Indiana, Illinois have seen very high pressure in some of the trials down that way. So that's something I'd be quite prepared for as we move into harvest of wheat. But, in terms of white mold as well, we're going to have to wait and see. White mold on soybeans and dry beans, we're going to have to wait and see. It's too early at this point in time.
Marty, this is Chris. I guess my question was, is there something that's typically in the southern U.S. that we would not normally see because our crops were too advanced? a virus,
Yeah.
something that we would not, but because we're going to have young crops in August, that maybe we would see something odd. I just thought about that.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Chris. So, you know, the one thing that the rust diseases are really the primary disease that will move, you know, particularly move up from down south. This year, we really haven't seen that much in terms of wheat. Stripe rust was really something, right? In 2016, we had that epidemic. And this year, it's been really quiet to the south. And now, you know, thankfully, we're sort of past that flowering window. If we've made that fungicide application, it's going to help give us some protection on the foliage anyway. But the levels of stripe rust are generally pretty low in the state. On corn, we're tracking southern rust of corn, and a couple of years ago that was also somewhat of an issue, not a you know, a major issue, but certainly in some fields, disease was pretty high in Michigan, and we don't normally see southern rust in corn. So that's certainly something as well to be potentially concerned about. At this point in time, it seems like disease down south is really not that great. So we wouldn't expect that much movement of southern rust to corn. My real concern is this tar spot, given that it's such a new disease. A lot of our varieties out there, you know, and not necessarily that resistant to the disease, and every variety has some level of susceptibility. And this particular disease is not moving from the south. It's here. It's overwintering on the debris that we have. Okay, and so that's the one I'm really, really concerned about. That's a good question, Chris. And I think the late finish, you know, is going to have an impact. Obviously, you know, ear molds again on corn. So that was a concern last year up in the thumb. So that's something else I'd be quite concerned about this year as well, just with the late finish. And again, we're going to have to see how the weather is, right? If we have dry conditions through silking and we happen to get lucky with a dry fall, then, you know, ear molds won't be a problem. But if we get moisture, it's going to be an issue.
Well, thank you, Marty. We appreciate the update on the tar spot, and certainly, as you and I talked, that we really can't afford to have much of a challenge with this late planted corn this year. So we're going to have to make sure that we try to keep all that leaf tissue and everything growing as fast as possible. So I would like to just kind of also talk a little bit about a couple of reminders. We have the delayed planted resources, that the screen that's up on the slide that's up on the screen right now, what MSU's been working on to try to help get information for folks on what to do if you weren't able to get things planted, or perhaps where we're at in terms of the growth and development now. I would like to remind us that we have our evaluation survey at